Hi, this is Yisachar Wartel. Thank you for watching. I am going to be giving a Pesach Dvar. This is adapted from my 5776 Dvar Torah. If you're not on my mailing list and would like to be, I give a Dvar Torah every week. I send it out via email and Facebook. On Facebook, you can check it out as Yisachar's Weekly Parsha Drush. And on Gmail, you can email me at yisacharchg@gmail.com, and I will gladly add you to the list. So I wanted to talk about a couple inyanim about Pesach. You can feel free to share them over at the Seder, talk about it with your friends, or just, add to your knowledge. All right, so I'm going to start off with something that I heard from Rabbi Baruch Bodenheim, who lives here in Pesach. I heard it from him 2 years ago, and he is mostly quoting the Gra with a couple of his own insights. So I'm going to start with that and then move on to some other things. So the Gra explains that on Pesach, we go from Chametz to Matzah, right, as we all know. Now, if you look at the words, Chametz is Chet Mem Tzadi, and Matzah is Mem Tzadi He. So both words contain Mem and Tzadi, right? So what's different is the Chet and the He. So the Gra explains that we are transformed from the level of the Chet into the letter He, right? And there's a lot to be explained, and Rabbi Bodenheim gives a full shiur on just that in his 5776 Dvar on this. But that the He, as we know mystically, represents a unification between the Daled and the Yud. The Daled being the physical, materialistic world, and the Yud being the spiritual world. Even though our pursuits are primarily spiritual on Pesach, we're using a physical item to enhance our spirituality. Right, we're using the matzah, we're using the Pesach tomorrow, but particularly the matzah is the main symbolism. So that's going to be the focus of the He. And I'll get back into a little bit about the symbolism of the He later. Rabbi Bodenheim also adds that the letter Chet, which is in Chametz, has the ability to go beyond. Right, we know mystically the letter 8 is related to the supernal, as we see by Hanukkah. It's going beyond the natural order of 7. Right. But because it represents going beyond, it can also represent an ego or a surplus of intense longing or whatever it might be, desire, satisfaction, intrinsic meaning, whatever it is. But it's going a little bit too far sometimes. So sometimes we need to pull back. Sometimes having a surplus is not necessarily good. So we go to a sense of a little bit of a drawback, a little bit of humility with the He. And by Matzah, we put this He at the end, right? So we want to figure out what that means, as opposed to Chametz, where the Chet comes first, right? So Chet, as I said, represents going beyond, and as I said, it can correspond to the ego, and we know the Chametz itself can correspond to ego. So when you put the letter Chet at the beginning, before the Mem Tzadi, then you're putting yourself first, right? This surplus, this ego, you're putting it first, and therefore can become a very strong misplaced priority, right? Whereas you put the He, then that's what you're ending on. That becomes your final conclusion, if you will. It becomes your basis, right? You go from the Mem to Tzadi and you land on the He. You land on a fixed formation between the physicality and the spirituality, which you're going to delve into the holiday and use that as a stronghold. As we see Bnei Yisrael leaving Yetziat Mitzrayim, and they're going to be shaped from a physical, downtrodden nation into a spiritual nation. And again, you sort of have the elements of the He, even though it goes far beyond that. So the letters He and Chet obviously are not just 5 and 8, but also are very similar in appearance, right? As we know, the Chet is similar to a He, although structured a little bit differently, but practically speaking, a He is sort of like a Chet with a little piece missing, right? And there are many people that comment on that. And if you look at the way it is in a Sefer Torah, right, as I mentioned, a He is a Yud and a Daled. A Chet is often a Zayin and a Zayin. It could also be a Vav and a Zayin. It depends on exact the script and exact nature. But a Yud and a Dalid is equal to 14, and a Zayin and a Zayin is also equal to 14. So hence is another similarity between the 5 and the 8. Also, both have the shelter, if you will. In other words, Chet is kind of like a hut, and Hey is kind of like a hut with a door. So they're both involves, a kind of a shelter. They both have 2 walls and a roof, right? But the difference is specifically on Pesach, we want that opening. We want that entrance to bring people in, to allow room, which again, also the ego. An ego is all-encompassing. It's a Chet, it's all-encompassing, whereas a Hey has room for other people, has room for other ideas. So I heard Rabbi Ben Zion Klatzko, who's an amazing, amazing individual, Shabbat.com, that he explained that there are 2 types of good people in this world. There are those who concern about what they're doing and that it's right, and therefore they're focused specifically on themselves because they don't want to make a mistake. It's not that they don't care about other people, but they want to make sure that they don't make a mistake. They want to make sure they don't do averis. They want to make sure that they're solid in their Yiddishkeit and their connection to Hashem. And so, not to neglect other people, but their focus is primarily on themselves because they want to work on themselves. And then there's other people who are specifically empathetic, right? Their focus is not on themselves at all, or very minimally so, and they're focused specifically on the needs of other people. And realistically, you actually need somewhere of a balance between the two. You have to work on yourself and you have to help other people. However, one of these definitely takes priority, right? Although it's important to both work on yourself and important to pay attention to other people, if you simply work on yourself and don't pay attention to the needs of other people, then you've missed out. You're the chametz. You're indulging in yourself and you're missing the boat. You're missing the point. The chet is solid walls, as I say. They have nowhere else to go, right? But the hay has the door to be able to reach to other people, right? Hashem instructed us specifically right before Yetziat Mitzrayim to take a lamb, which most families would not be able to consume on their own. Most people did not have enough people to eat an entire keves, an entire lamb, right? So they specifically had to share it with others. Hashem orchestrated it that they would have to share this carbon with others, right? Yet they could not divide it so that you can, okay, here's a piece for me, here's a piece for you. No, they actually had to partake of it together as one unit. They were together as if they were one family, even if they were not from the same family. So this is what the hay represents. It represents reaching out to others, sharing with others, and that's part of the reason, or the primary reason, why the Seder is a time that's so integral across the whole Jewish spectrum, not just religious people, but the whole Jewish spectrum, to invite people over, to invite family, to invite colleagues. It's an incredible time to share with people of incredibly diverse backgrounds and knowledge. And that's part of what the matzah represents. It's something that is simple, but is relatable to everybody. Right? Everybody knows what a matzah is, right? There's so many different kinds of bread. There's this kind of bread, this texture, this crumbs, seeds, whatever it is. But matzah, it's flour and water. We can't even add anything else to it, right? It's pashut. It's simple, and therefore it's the same for everybody. Now that I've spoken about the chet and the hay, I want to go into another inyan with the chet and the hay. There's another place where they're switched. Right? So the entire time in the Mitzrayim began with the story of Yosef. He was given the Ketonet HaPasim, the striped cloak, or the cloak of many colors, whatever you want to call it. And because of Yaakov's favoritism, whether possibly misplaced or not, Yosef's careless words of his brothers, which may have been necessary, may not, and the brothers' lack of empathy towards him, which definitely was a fault, we were forced to live our lives and learn our lessons in Mitzrayim. Right? The exact nature of to what extent we're involved, how much was necessary, all of this is part of a much, much greater debate. But we see that the symbolism of the Ketones HaPasim is seen in the karpas, which the Gemara picks up on, right? Karpas, right? The pas in karpas, which is what we dip into salt water, is related to the Ketonet HaPasim. We are mourning with the tears of karpas. It's not just the bitterness of slavery, but also the discourse between the brothers that we had in Mitzrayim. So, Pasim, right, has the letters Pei and Samech, right? But what also has Pei and Samech? Pesach, And what's the extra letter? Chet. So now we have a chet instead of a hey. So if the hey is so integral, then why do we have a chet instead of a hey by Pesach? By Matzah, we have the hey instead of the chet. Pesach, we have the chet instead of a hey, right? As pasah, pasim, whatever you want to say, but it's or hapas, whatever. But basically, the ikar is the chet by Pesach, whereas the hey by Matzah. So the question is why? So, as I mentioned, hey is a unification of the yud and the daled. And when Yaakov gave the Tonet Pasim to Yosef, he only had good intentions. He didn't want it to cause jealousy. He didn't have anything in mind to say that, oh, the brothers are bad or not as good as Yosef, but there was a certain chavivus that he had. And therefore, it was not so bad that he showed favoritism in a sense, right? And the beautiful colors represented the many aspects of Yosef's personality, which we see come out throughout the story in Mitzrayim, and also all the different dimensions of love that Yaakov had for him. So it really wasn't so bad, right? And it's hapasim, right? It was ketonet hapasim. So here we have the hey first. And only after the whole entire travail in Mitzrayim does the hey get shifted to the end and become Pesach. So here you have the hey at the beginning, and then you have a chet at the end. So that's also reversed. So the letter hey, when placed at the beginning of the word, becomes an article, right? Meaning the. Now, it creates a unique significance, and therefore when the brothers saw that Yosef was singled out as the hey, the special brother, they harbored jealousy towards him. And ultimately, it grew to hatred, and they sold him down to Mitzrayim, and the whole story goes on from there. And perhaps Yosef might have even felt that he was a little bit better than his brothers because of the cloak or the special treatment or the chavivus of Yaakov. And therefore, maybe he felt that he had a right to speak about them to Yaakov, which was probably a mistake. But then Hashem decides to turn everything on its head. We just had Purim was v'nahafachu, but it actually happens a little bit by Pesach as well. Yosef becomes singled out, specifically because of negative things, but ultimately because of this, becomes even more prominent, right? The brothers tried to play him down, to try and make him insignificant. Oh, he's just going to be a slave in Mitzrayim and nothing will happen to him and that'll be the end of his dreams. And in fact, it's just the opposite, right? Yet, he's ultimately a pawn for Hashem's plan, not for his own grandeur. And Yosef realized this. He has the element of humility, right? Right? He goes from chametz to matzah in a sense. He goes from this hubris, this ego that he sort of had inside, and he realizes ultimately it's part of Hashem's plan, and he's just a little pawn in this humongous scheme, this humongous, elaborate development that Hashem is creating throughout the next 210 years. So he basically makes the chametz into humility, which is matzah. Right? And therefore, when the Jewish people become mired in slavery, in Mitzrayim, they lose sight of being individuals and having any importance at all. So they had a humility in a sense, but it ultimately faded into no self-esteem. And they were beaten and burdened and horribly mistreated, murdered, everything. And they lost their sense of self. They had no sense of ego. They had absolutely nothing. And hence Hashem had to put it. And Hashem had to put it at the end of the word Pesach, right? You are special. You need some ego. Not an ego so much as individuals, even though you are important as individuals, but important as a nation. You are the chet. You are the supernal. You are the one who goes above nature. You are the eight. You are going to be, you took that pas, you took that striped cloak, which represented animosity and strife, and you jumped from that, and now you're in a solid place of the chet where you can stand on your own as an important member of Klal Yisrael, as a nation, right? And he wanted to make sure people recognize this, that now you're no longer lowly slaves, you're now an important nation. You're Hashem's nation, right? And to show that, they had to put blood on the doorposts, right? They specifically took the sheep, the idol of Mitzrayim, and they slaughtered it, thereby disavowing themselves, at least theoretically, from the Avodah Zarah of Mitzrayim, and in turn giving over themselves to Hashem through this act of Dam, which, as we know, is symbolic of a brit, of a covenant, as we also have by Brit Milah, of course. And therefore they were Pesach. Right? And of course, all of this happened during Makat Bechorot, which was the 10th of the plagues, all of which were above nature. So we again see the letter Chet, or Ches, as some people say, coming to action. Right? But now, with the Pesach, they had to temper it. They had to temper it with the hay of matzah, because you're important, but you're not entirely self-important, because ultimately you're now avadim of Hashem, right? As I heard yesterday, we actually went from one Eved to another Eved. We were an Eved in Mitzrayim, and we became the avadim of Hashem. Now, obviously, there's a huge fundamental difference, on a million times. Like once to a human being who's horrible, and once to Kadosh Baruch Hu, the master of everything. So obviously, one is not so great, and one's an incredible benefit. But there was some element of that. So we had to realize that we are part of something, that we're not, strictly speaking, amazingly ego and powerful and an incredible nation, and we can do whatever we want. We actually have rules, and this is tempered by the matzah, and therefore they had to be reminded of their slavery in Egypt as well, and also that and obviously chipazon, which is also interesting because that also has a chay and a pet, but I'm not going into that. But they had to have both the elements of the chet and the hay. They had to eat the Pesach and the matzah together. Maror is a topic for another discussion, but that also fits into this nicely. So, we therefore have a balance. We have the chet in the Pesach, and we have the hay in the matzah, and now we balance them. And then we have 13. 8 and 5 is 13, which is echad, right? So, now everything is together. We have our empathy towards other people. We recognize our importance, but we have the hay to draw them in and solidify ourselves with the Pesach, which is the important realization of our status of a nation. So we need both. And we cannot forget what we took to get there. So now looking at the matzahs themselves, right? Nowadays, we only have the matzah. We don't have the carbon Pesach. So let's look strictly at the matzah. We know we have 3 matzot, right? And as the Haggadah tells us, it stands for Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. We have the 3 layers. Right, now as we know, the matzah represents 2 specific aspects, which are completely paradoxical in nature. One is the lowly bread of affliction, the lechem oni, as we say, right? It represents a very meek and humble existence of poor and lonely and lowliness, but yet it also represents cherus. It represents freedom. It's free of any ingredients. It's simple. Everybody can relate to it. And we took it on our backs with haste because we're coming out from Yetziat Mitzrayim. We're free. And that's why we made matzah. So we actually have matzah for both reasons. So matzah is in itself kind of like this paradoxical dichotomy, which is fascinating and also a subject of many different shiurim. So if matzah has 2 factors, then why do we have 3 of them, right? Normally we have lecha mishnah by a chag or by Shabbos, right? We have 2 breads, 2 loaves, in this case 2 matzahs, right? So why do we have 3? As we said, for Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. Now, as I had mentioned before, the concept of 3 has many different symbolisms in Judaism, and one of which is what we teach in Pirkei Avot, which is Torah, Avodah, V'Gimulat Chasadim, right? The Torah stands on 3. The world stands on 3 things: Torah, which is all the Torah and its principles; Avodah, which is the aspect of serving Hashem, which includes karbanos; and we have Gemilut Chasadim, which is kindness towards others, and all of which are incredibly indispensable. So, which one of these matzahs do we break? We actually break the middle matzah, which represents Levi, which is something I'll get back to in a moment. Why do we break the middle matzah? Right? So the middle matzah, on one level, represents pnimius. It represents the essence. Right? So the matzah, which is meant to be an absence of a intense physical desire, right? It's meant to be simple. It's meant to represent a way to use physicality to get into a state of spirituality by not indulging in something so intense. So we're going to take the panemius, we're going to take the inner part of this three-layered matzah, and that's what we're going to use to ultimately satisfy us with the Korban Pesach, or as we have it, the afikomen at the end of the meal. So that's why the second one is intrinsic. We also have the fact that it represents the Levium. The Levium were specifically the ones who did the singing in the Beit HaMikdash. In fact, many people don't know that if the avoda was done without singing, it was invalid. The singing was that important. And singing is one of those acts which is an expression of the soul. It is something which has a dimension of intense spirituality. The avoda itself, although obviously to Hashem in the Beit HaMikdash, was a physical act. It was ultimately a physical act. You're slaughtering animals, you're bringing flour, whatever it is, you're lighting a menorah. That's a little more complicated. But you're doing physical acts. But the singing was something which was purely your ears, your sense. It was something surreal, right? And they sang an amazing harmony. They had to have beautiful voices, and it was an incredible thing. So that's what the Levium represent. And as we said, it represents the avoda. Now the avoda had two parts, as I said. You had the actual physical avoda, and then you also had the singing. So why is it broken in half? So I heard from, just today actually, from Rabbi Ben Sion Twersky, another Ben Sion, that part of the reason why we break the middle matzah is because we can get by with the matzahs of life. We can get by being poor, we can get by being free, and every active spectrum in between. But when you're dealing with the spiritual world and you want to connect with that, it's never complete, right? You have your top matzah, which represents one aspect of physicality. You have your bottom matzah, which represents another aspect of physicality, even if it's limited or in a heightened sense. The middle one represents pure intrinsic panemius, intrinsic spirituality that we're connecting with. And that's never complete. You're always striving to connect closer and closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And hence, part of the reason we symbolize breaking it is to symbolize that we're always searching for more. We're always searching for a piece. And this actually ties into the other thing I was saying about the concept of the hay in the matzah, that we're reaching out to other people. We're breaking off a piece and then ultimately coming back to it. We always have time for other people. We split the afikomen with other people, just like we split the Korban Pesach with other people. We have two halves to a whole. Now, if you'll realize that one half is slightly bigger than the other half, right? We break off the bigger piece, and that's what we save for the afikomen. Now, I had mentioned before that we had two avodas. One was in the Beit HaMikdash with the actual avodah, one was with singing. But if you think about it that way, the other avoda is really the Kohen. So that would be the top matzah. So there has to be another way that we can divide the avoda. So we can say, because there are two aspects of the matzah, one from when we were in Mitzrayim and one from when we were leaving Mitzrayim, that one of the avodas, one half of the avoda, has to do with the avdus in Mitzrayim, the avoda that we did in Mitzrayim. And then the second half of the avoda is the avoda that we do for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the avoda that we do for the rest of our lives as Jewish people in serving Hashem. And that is more important, and that's why that half is bigger. And that's why that saves to the end, because that's what's going to endure. Now, I have some gematria and wordplay for you, which I hope you'll enjoy. And if not, enjoy it anyway. So, Chatzi matzah, right? We break the matzah in half. So the words Chatzi matzah are equal to Avram, right? Avram was the person who got this started. He was the one who saw Hashem in a world of oblivion, of nothingness, tons of avodah zarah, and he started this people which became the nation. And in the merit and the promise that Hashem told Avram, the Bris Ben Betarim, that we would be slaves of Mitzrayim and become a nation and be able to endure everything throughout history, ultimately started with Avram. But Avram, in order for this to happen, had to become Avraham, right? Something extra had to be added. It had to be a little bit more. So too, when we're symbolizing the promise, which is also part of the symbolism of the matzah, we add a little bit more. So we have one half a little bit bigger than the other. Right? Now, specifically, it's the matzah sheni. It's the second matzah. Now, matzah sheni is equal to 495. So if you were to cut that in half, right, then you get 247 and a half. But because we want one part to be a little bit bigger, let's round it up. We get 248, which, coincidentally, is the gematria of Abraham, right? He is the founder of the Jewish people. He is the founder of everything and all of the principles that we hold dear. Now, obviously, we learn from many, many different people. But this Matzah Sheni, the ability to connect to the spiritual self in a physical world, is something which Abraham took on and started. And we also know 248 corresponds to 248 words of the Shema, as well as part of or what makes up a lot of the components of our body. We also say is 248. Now, one last piece is that Chatzi Matzah Sheni. If you take those words specifically, half of the Matzah Sheni. So Chatzi Matzah Sheni, that's equal to Bnei Yisrael. Because we're each a half looking for the other component, and we always look for the avoda to Hashem. Right? We are that middle matzah that's split. We have our lechem mishnah on the top and the bottom. We have our bases, but we have to develop our spirituality in the middle. That's what makes us Jewish people. And who was this that really started this in Mitzrayim? After we were so downtrodden, it was Moshe. And don't forget, Moshe was a Levi. So we actually had the Leviim before the Kohanim. Before Aaron was appointed as a Kohen to be in the Mishkan. And the whole legacy that follows therein. Leviim came first. The whole tribe of Levi came before the whole concept of Kohanim. Right? Now we knew it was gonna happen, but ultimately Moshe started this. Moshe was the one who led the Jewish people. He's the one who tried to convince them of the importance of Hashem and take them out of Mitzrayim. The whole concept we see in Mitzrayim started with Moshe. It started with the Leviim. It started with this amazing exodus that ultimately culminated in the singing at the Shir HaTayam with the Kriyas Yamsuf. And we see singing is important, that it's so integral. This panemius, the expression of the internalization of oneself, is what we have to do. And that's why we spread it. And we have to separate it and put it to the side to remember it when we finish our meal, when we've satiated ourselves on everything, and we're full, and we have wine, and we feel good, and we just want to go to sleep. We end off with the matzah. We end off with a little bit of humility, and we end off with a little bit of reminder, and specifically the bigger piece to remind us that Bnei Yisrael is always Chatzi Matzah Sheni. Bnei Yisrael is always that bigger piece of matzah. We always have that avoda to connect to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, that we are Hashem's people. We have to represent Him in this world. And that's part of what Pesach is. We weren't taken out just to be free. We were taken out to serve a purpose in this world. And that purpose endures forever. And it's something which we have to relate to our children and everybody else at the Seder. So my wish to you is that you have an amazing, spiritual, uplifting, meaningful Pesach, Sedarim, and whole rest of the year. Thank you very much.